castle, and the gunshot. Content advisory. This episode contains discussion of homicide and gun violence. The focus is on verified facts from court records and reputable reporting. There are no graphic descriptions beyond what's necessary to understand the case. There are houses that feel like homes, and there are houses that feel like fortresses. The kind with walls that don't just mark a boundary, they announce it. Iron gates, a long driveway, landscaping that isn't there to look nice so much as it is to separate. It's the kind of place where the outside world is kept at a distance, and what happens inside stays inside, unless someone is standing close enough to hear it. In the early hours of February 3rd, 2003, police were called to one of those places in Alhambra, California, a mansion often referred to in reporting as the Pyrenees Castle. And the reason they were called wasn't a complicated report. It wasn't a neighbor describing screams. It wasn't a frenetic 911 call from inside the house. It was something colder, cleaner, more clinical. A chauffeur outside the property said he heard a sound, a single, sharp pop. Then he saw the homeowner come out, holding a gun. That homeowner was Phil Spector, the legendary music producer. And the chauffeur, Adriano De Souza, would testify that Spector said something that made the whole night snap into focus like a camera shutter. "I think I killed somebody." Inside the foyer of that house, police found a woman slumped in a chair. She was still wearing her coat. Her purse was nearby. Her name was Lana Clarkson, and she was dead, killed by a single gunshot wound to the mouth. It's the kind of scene that, in movies, would be covered in chaos, overturned furniture, broken glass, screaming witnesses. But the facts described in reporting and case summaries point to something far more unsettling. A quiet entry space, a body in a chair, one wound, one gunshot. A case that would take years to fully resolve, not because no one knew where it happened, but because the fight would be over how it happened. Lana Clarkson before the gates closed. Before Lana Clarkson became the victim in a celebrity trial, she was plainly a working performer trying to keep her footing in a business that loves you loudly and then forgets you quietly. She was born Lana Jean Clarkson on April the 5th, 1962, in Long Beach, California. She was raised for a time in the hills of Sonoma Country, attending school in Northern California, before her family returned to Southern California and settled in the San Fernando Valley when she was a teenager. In the early 1980s, she entered the entertainment industry as an actress and model. Her most recognizable screen identity, what many people still remember her for, was a striking presence in 1980s genre films, especially sword and sorcery titles like Deathstalker and Barbarian Queen. But the harsh reality of Hollywood is that known and secure are not the same thing. By 2003, she wasn't living inside a spotlight. She was doing what countless performers do when roles thin out, taking steady work to survive. Multiple sources describe her working at the House of Blues in West Hollywood as a hostess, with reporting noting she had started that job only weeks before her death. And people close to her described the woman as someone who had not given up. The Los Angeles Times, reporting right after her death, quoted actress Sally Kirkland describing the uphill fight for women over 40 in the industry and calling Clarkson such a pro, saying she would arrive early and work hard. There's also a quieter detail that sits in stark contrast to the sensational way the case is often discussed. Clarkson's biography notes she volunteered with Project Angel Food, the Los Angeles charity known for delivering meals to seriously ill people. So if you want the real prologue to this case, it's not a celebrity and a mansion. It's a woman with a complicated, hard-working Hollywood life, showing up for shifts, showing up for causes, and doing the best with what she had. Did you know? VIP hostesses can be a high-pressured role. At major venues, VIP staff aren't just greeting people. They're often tasked with keeping powerful patrons happy, smoothing conflict, and enforcing access rules until management tells them not to. That power dynamic becomes painfully relevant in this case because it's part of what placed Clarkson and Spector in the same orbit that night. How Lana Clarkson met Phil Spector the night of February 2nd to 3rd, 2003. A very specific kind of person walked in. Phil Spector wasn't just famous, he was historic in music. He was closely associated with the Wall of Sound, a solo production that made records sound huge, dense, layered, almost orchestral, designed to hit hard through radio and speakers. By the early 2000s, Spector's public image had become a mix of music legend and eccentric recluse. Reporting about his later years often described him as increasingly isolated and erratic. And on this night, he was at the House of Blues, where Clarkson was working. In case summaries and reporting, Clarkson met Spector while on shift and later left with him. That is the key transition. Not a secret meeting, not a random abduction. A celebrity and a working woman leave a nightlife venue together, and the chauffeur drives them to the celebrity's home. The chauffeur waits outside. The two go inside. They met at the House of Blues in West Hollywood the same night she died, where she was working. That's stated in court summaries and in the published appellate decisions. But the texture of that meeting, how it happened in a real workplace, under real workplace pressure, shows up in contemporaneous reporting. Reporting in The Guardian describes Clarkson initially refusing Spector admission to the club's VIP area and then being told by management to treat him like gold. A later Guardian account adds another sharp human detail. Clarkson reportedly mistook Spector for a woman at first. The management corrected her and again told her to treat him like gold. That matters because it places the interaction firmly in the kind of awkward, hierarchical reality that service workers know. A rule is enforced until someone important arrives, and then the rule becomes do what you're told. The Los Angeles Times published a timeline of Spector's evening leading into the House of Blues, moving through multiple late-night locations before arriving at the venue. And a separate Los Angeles Times report describes Clarkson as a foundation room hostess who had been working there about 3 weeks at the time. Here's one of the most important anchoring facts in the entire How They Met sequence, because it's not memory, not opinion, not vibe. The Los Angeles Times reported the House of Blues records showed Clarkson clocked out at 2:21 a.m. And in the same reporting, the chauffeur's account adds a detail that's small, but heavy. He said Clarkson repeatedly declined Spector's invitation to visit his house, then relented, telling the driver she would stay only for one drink. That line, one drink, isn't speculation. It's presented in that reporting as part of the driver's description of what was said. Time magazine writing soon after the killing described their meeting as brief and noted that around 2:30 a.m., Clarkson accompanied Spector to his car to go to his castle-like mansion in Alhambra. So the arc factually looks like this. Clarkson is working at the House of Blues. Spector is there late that night and she meets him. Venue power dynamics are in play, VIP access, treat him like gold. She clocks out at 2:21 a.m. The chauffeur reports she's initially declining going to his home, then agrees, saying she'd stay only for a drink. Then they go to his home in Alhambra, driven by chauffeur Adriano de Souza. And that is the last stretch of the night we can describe with confidence before the story became a homicide investigation. Did you know why clock-out times matter so much in court? A time clock record is cold, boring and extremely powerful, because it doesn't remember wrong. When a case hinges on a narrow window, minutes and hours, small administrative facts like 2:21 a.m. become the spine jurors can hold on to while everything else is argued. Now, here's the part that makes this case so unsettling in hindsight. They didn't have a long relationship. They didn't have months of history. Major reporting describes them as having met only hours earlier, and yet, within that short span, Clarkson is behind the gates of the Pyrenees Castle, and she will not leave alive. The published appellate opinion summarized the prosecution's core narrative this way. Clarkson accepted Spector's invitation to visit his home. The chauffeur drove them there, and later the chauffeur said Spector came out holding a revolver and said he had killed someone. That's the legal spine. The human tragedy is everything inside that gap. And as the case is ultimately tried, those two facts become the frame around everything. Clarkson went to Spector's home with him that night. Later that morning, she was found dead there. No matter what argument comes later, suicide, homicide, accident, the timeline begins with that simple reality. Did you know Phil Spector was pivotal in the design for the Wall of Sound? A revolutionary production technique. The Wall of Sound wasn't just louder, It was a method. Multiple instruments layered, recorded with deliberate blending and ambience so they fused into one big, thick sonic mass. An approach widely credited to Spector's early 1960s studio work. It's relevant here because it highlights the sharp contrast at the heart of this case. The man famous for building massive, beautiful soundscapes is later at the center of a story defined by one brutal sound, one gunshot. The drive to the castle. The drive from West Hollywood to Alhambra is the kind of trip that can feel deceptively normal. Freeways, streetlights, late night quiet. The city thinning as you get farther from the nightlife center. The chauffeur, Adriano de Souza, drove them to Spector's home. That detail is consistently described in case summaries and reporting. Spector and Clarkson arrived, went inside, and the chauffeur waited in the car. And the waiting began. This is a detail people sometimes gloss over, but it's important. The chauffeur's role placed him in the one position where he could act like a human tripwire between a private estate and the public world. The house may have been designed to keep things in, but the chauffeur was outside close enough to hear what neighbors could not. Later he said he heard a sound like a pop, then he saw Spector come out holding a gun, and inside the mansion Clarkson was found slumped in a chair with a single gunshot wound to the mouth, with broken teeth described in summaries of the scene. Now it becomes messy, because one detail can be interpreted in different ways by different sides. A wound can be framed as self-inflicted or inflicted by another person. A quiet foyer can be framed as no struggle or a sudden assault. A statement can be argued as confession, shock, exaggeration, or confusion, but certain facts don't move. She died in the home, chauffeur heard a gunshot from outside, and the chauffeur attributed that statement to Spector's moment after the shot. Very early on, Phil Spector's position was that Lana Clarkson killed herself, a suicide narrative that would become central to the defense. But after investigation, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office ruled Clarkson's death as a homicide. That matters because the coroner's ruling isn't a courtroom verdict, but it's a professional determination that guides how the case is pursued. If the death is ruled suicide, law enforcement and prosecutors may never file charges. If it's ruled homicide, the question becomes who did it and can it be proven? The coroner ruling described the cause as a gunshot wound and the manner as homicide. So now, the story hardens into a legal conflict. The defense says Clarkson shot herself. The state proceeds as though she was killed by another person. And hanging over that conflict is the uncomfortable reality of a private mansion. Only 2 people were inside. Only one of them survived. So if a jury is ever going to convict, they have to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that suicide doesn't fit the evidence and that homicide does. Did you know homicide as a manner of death means caused by another person, not the suspect is proven guilty? That's why cases can be ruled homicide and still remain unsolved, or be hotly contested in court. The coroner's homicide ruling in this case is reported as a key milestone after investigation. When the past walks into the court. One of the most disputed parts of Phil Spector's prosecution was what's often called other acts. Evidence. Testimony from multiple women describing prior incidents where Spector allegedly threatened them with guns. This isn't a small detail. It becomes a pillar in the state's narrative, because if you're arguing that a woman did not kill herself, that instead she died during an assault involving a firearm, then evidence that the defendant had used guns to threaten women before can be highly persuasive. But courts don't let that in casually. That's why this issue shows up prominently in the published appellate opinion People v. Spector 2011. In that decision, the Court of Appeal describes other crimes evidence consisting of testimony from 5 women over about a 20-year period who said they were victims of armed assault or threats by Spector. And the key legal point the appellate court addresses is whether this evidence was properly admitted, ultimately concluding it was, including as relevant to rebut the idea that Clarkson's death was self-inflicted and to support the prosecution's implied malice theory. This is important because this explains why the trial was so polarizing. The defense wanted the jury to stay in the foyer, stay in that single moment, stay in the isolated physics of one gunshot. The prosecution wanted to widen the lens and say, you can't judge this moment without acknowledging what multiple witnesses described about his past conduct with firearms. And did you know The justice system tries to avoid convictions based on defendants' bad reputation. That's why prior acts are heavily controlled. But appellate summaries of this case note that the evidence was admitted for specific purposes, such as rebutting suicide and showing absence of accident or mistake, and the appellate court upheld that decision. 5.5 months to no verdict. By 2007, the case had moved from shocking headline to courtroom marathon. Phil Spector went to trial for Clarkson's death. The first trial became a major public event, televised, heavily covered, and defined by collision of celebrity, forensic disputes, and that central suicide versus murder divide. The jury already heard the prosecution's framework, how Clarkson was killed, what the chauffeur heard, and the scene as it were. They also heard the defense that Clarkson died by suicide. So the question here is, how much certainty does beyond a reasonable doubt require when only 2 people were in the room? After months of testimony, the jury deliberated. Then in late 2007, the trial ended in a hung jury, a mistrial. Reporting at the time described the split as 10-2 in favor of conviction. That's a brutal outcome for everyone. For prosecutors, it's not an acquittal, but it's not justice finished. For the victim's family, it's not closure, it's a door left half open. And for the defendant, it's a second chance. And for the public, it's the kind of result that makes people ask the same unnerving question. If a case can reach this point, with a death in a mansion, a witness outside, a homicide ruling, how does it end without a verdict? Legal commentators at the time pointed to what wealth can do in court, resources, experts, time, and the ability to fight every inch of the narrative. But a hung jury does not end a case, it resets it. Did you know when a jury can't reach a unanimous verdict, the judge can declare a mistrial because there is no final verdict, prosecutors can choose to retry the case. That's what happened here, after the 2007 deadlock. The reset button. When a case doesn't end, it reloads. A hung jury is one of the strangest non-endings in the justice system, because for the outside world, it feels like the story has already reached the credits. Months of testimony, photographs, experts, legal arguments, a case that has filled headlines. And then the jury comes back and says, in effect, we can't agree. In Spector's first trial, that deadlock was widely reported as 10 jurors leaning toward a conviction and 2 against. Not enough for the unanimity required. So the case didn't resolve, it resets. And that led to the retrial beginning again with jury reselection in October 2008. Again in Los Angeles Superior Court with Judge Larry Paul Fiedler presiding. This time the trial was not televised, a detail repeatedly noted in case summaries and reporting about the second proceeding, and that matters more than it sounds like it should. Because cameras change courtrooms, they change the rhythm of the day, the pressure of witnesses, the shape of public narrative. Without them, the retrial became what many criminal trials are in real life, a long, dense grind of testimony, less spectacle and more work. And by the time the retrial was deeply underway, the courtroom had been soaked in evidence for months. According to ABC reporting at the time, deliberations began. Jurors had heard 5 months of testimony, and they weren't only asked to choose between murder and suicide, they were also instructed to consider the possibility of a lesser charge, manslaughter, or outright acquittal. That's important because it tells you how many doors the jury had to walk through. They weren't deciding between 2 neat options. They were deciding between multiple competing interpretations of the same brutal core fact. A woman ended up dead in the foyer of a mansion, and the defense continued to insist the same foundational claim. Lana Clarkson shot herself. Did you know in California, second-degree murder can still mean a life sentence? 15 years to life, depending on enhancement and parole decisions. That's why the phrase second degree can mislead people, because it sounds like a downgrade when legally you can still place someone in prison for decades or for life. The jury gets the case and the room goes very quiet. On March 26, 2009, the case went to the jury. ABC reported the jury was composed of 7 men and 5 women, and that their task was to decide whether Phil Spector committed murder, manslaughter, or whether Lana Clarkson did indeed commit suicide. So if it's murder, intentional or implied malice killing, if it's manslaughter, unlawful killing without murder's malice element, and if it's suicide, no homicide, no crime. And this is where the case becomes psychologically brutal, because jurors aren't just listening to evidence anymore, they are living with it. They go back into their private room with the entire case sitting in their head like a weight. They replay testimony, they argue, they get unstuck, they circle back. And in this case, deliberations weren't a quick afternoon decision, they stretched on. Reporting noted that there were interruptions during deliberations, issues like juror illness, while the jury continued its work toward a verdict. And all that time, behind the scenes, one truth remained unchanged. This was the second time the system had asked a group of people to decide what happened behind the gates of that house. And everyone knew how the first attempt ended. So the tension wasn't just about guilt, it was also about whether the justice system was going to end up in the same deadlock purgatory again. Did you know a retrial can shift on small things that sound insignificant until you've lived them? A different jury dynamic, different pacing, and slightly different order of witnesses and how jurors deliberate together. The Los Angeles Times reported on the contrast in deliberations between the first trial's contentious process and the retrial's smoother path to conviction. The verdict, when the case finally snapped into place. On April 13, 2009, the jury returned its decision. Phil Spector was found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Lana Clarkson. This wasn't a vague "something happened." This was a formal, legal conclusion, homicide proven beyond a reasonable doubt, to the satisfaction of that jury. And the verdict carried another crucial finding. The jury also found Spector guilty of personal use of a firearm, which would later add 4 years to his sentence. The man who, according to the witness testimony, walked out holding a gun after the shot and said, "I think I killed somebody," was now legally branded a murderer by a jury. And immediately after the verdict, he was taken into custody. Sentencing took place on May 29, 2009. Phil Spector was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison for the murder of Lana Clarkson. Associated Press coverage published by CBS described Judge Fiddler ordering 15 years to life for second-degree murder, plus 4 years for personal use of a gun. And here is the strange emotional geometry of sentencing in homicide cases. The courtroom is full. The cameras may be there or not. Lawyers stand up and speak in practiced language, and the victim remains absent in the most permanent way possible. Lana Clarkson was killed in 2007. The sentence came in 2009. That span of time is part of the story too, because the legal system moves at a pace that can feel almost insulting when the event it's responding to happens in seconds. The case turns into paper and precedent. After conviction, Spector appealed because that's what defendants do when they still have legal oxygen left. And here's where the story becomes less about the FOIA and more about rules. In May 2011, the California Court of Appeal affirmed Spector's conviction in People v. Spector. One of the major issues addressed was whether the trial court properly admitted other crimes evidence. Testimony from 5 women over 20 years period describing gun assaults or threats by Spector. The appellate framing matters because it shows what the law believed that evidence helped establish. That Clarkson's death was not self-inflicted, and that the evidence was relevant to the prosecution's implied malice theory. Later, higher courts declined to undo the conviction. ABC News reported that in February 2012, the US Supreme Court declined to review Spector's case, leaving the California Appeals Court ruling in place. So, the conviction stood and stuck. Did you know appellate courts are typically not retrying the facts? They're examining whether legal errors occurred, for example, evidence that should have not been admitted, and whether any errors likely affected the outcome. The published appellate opinion is a window into what was challenged and what the court upheld. So, let's have a look at the final outcome and what remains. Phil Spector served his sentence in the California prison system. In January 2021, Reuters reported that Spector died at age 81 while still incarcerated, with reporting that he died of COVID-19 complications while serving his sentence. And that is where his story ends. But the center of this case, the point the story keeps orbiting, is not the celebrity name. It's the facts that don't move. Lana Clarkson found dead in Phil Spector's home in the early hours of Feb 3rd, 2003. The chauffeur testifying about hearing a gunshot and hearing Spector say, "I think I killed somebody." The first trial ended hung, the second ended in a conviction for second-degree murder. Spector was sentenced to 19 years to life, 15 to life plus 4 years for firearm use, and the conviction was upheld on appeal. And if you zoom out, if you step back from the mansion walls and the courtroom years, what's disturbing about this case is how quickly an ordinary work night turned irreversible. A woman goes to work, meets someone famous, ends up behind gates, and by morning, there is a chair in a foyer that becomes the centerpiece in one of the most high-profile murder trials in modern entertainment history. When people call this story the Phil Spector case, it's easy to forget what that phrasing does. It pulls attention towards the famous name. But the story doesn't belong to the famous name. It belongs to Lana Clarkson. And if there's a lasting lesson in how this case played out, from the first hung jury to the second jury's conviction, it's this. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive quickly. Sometimes it arrives in pieces. Sometimes it arrives on the second attempt. But the facts remain and the outcome is real. This has been your tale teller from Stories Fables Ghostly Tales True Crime. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and remember, the scariest stories aren't always the ones in alleyways. Sometimes they're the ones that close quietly behind you, with the world left outside the gate. Thank you so much for listening. And now, I want to thank my Patreon supporters. My amazing long-time friend and supporter, the jaw-droppingly brilliant and epic, a real close friend of mine, Matto Star.
Matto Star!
Thank you, Matto, for being the kind of supporter and friend who would treat a case like Lana Clarkson with reverence, not rubbernecking. Your love of Baroque music reminds me that heavy stories need structure, tension, restraint, and a careful resolve. And your passion for architecture fits too. Because justice in this case wasn't a single moment, it was built over years, piece by piece, until the verdict finally held. Having a solid foundation matters. And you, Matto, are my solid foundation. And I do have a question. When a case involves fame and power, what matters to you for the truth to land? Forensics, witness testimony, or the pattern of prior behavior, Matto? I'm keen to know. Thank you so much for your support. Your kindness and being your epically brilliant self. Have an amazing week ahead, Matto. And now to my White Tea Warlords.
White Tea Warlord!
First up is Lesosaurus Rex. Lesosaurus, my gym-loving White Tea Warlord, you're the keep your feet planted energy this community needs after an episode like this. You'd approach the facts like a training plan, steady, disciplined, and not distracted by any noise. No sensational nonsense, just what can be proven and what that proof means. And Leza, do you think celebrity makes justice harder to reach, or does it simply make the process louder while the evidence still decides? Maya, the Queen of Cats, my next White Tea Warlord, you bring the empathy that stops true crime from turning us cold. You'd be the one reminding everyone that Lana Clarkson wasn't a plot point. She was a person who went to work and didn't come home. That kind of compassion matters, especially when a famous name threatens to dominate the conversation. My question to you is, what's one thing you wish more people remembered when discussing cases like this? The victim's humanity, the timeline, or the impact on families? And Sangeetha the Seer, my brilliant future visionary, you're the clarity in the dark, Sangeetha. You'd listen for what's solid, for what's testified to, what the court decided, what the verdict actually means, and you'd ask the deeper questions, not to speculate but to understand. How does a case travel through two trials and finally reach a legal conclusion? My question to you is, in your view, what does justice look like here? Accountability, closure, or simply the truth being formally recognized? And now I want to thank my Earl Grey enforcers and all tiers thereafter. I am so lucky to have Chad Warren, Peter Raffaelli, Just Heather, Juicebox Andy, Divided by Zero, Paige Kramer, Seductive Smiles, Jane Gumnick, and Michael Krupp. Thank you so much for your support. And my question to you is, if you were on that jury, what would you personally need to hear or see to be certain? Would the chauffeur's account and the courtroom's evidence be enough for you? Or would the very idea of reasonable doubt still keep you from a guilty verdict? I'm keen to hear your thoughts. Leave your comments below, because I absolutely love reading comments on Patreon or via email. I had one question come from one of my White Tea Warlords, actually. In your research, did you find that Erin served her beef Wellington on a different coloured plate? That was one interesting detail that Bailey had mentioned in her retelling. Not sure if that was simply a rumour, but interesting nonetheless. I would have found her guilty. The lying up front unfortunately erased any trust that I had in her actual testimony. Mate Leza, I didn't actually come across the different coloured plate in my research for the last true crime episode I did last weekend. This was for the Leongatha mushroom murders, if any of you lovelies are wondering what Leza is referring to. So last week I did the episode on the Leongatha mushroom murders, but never came across that different colored plate component. But you have me thinking, Leza. You have me thinking, mate. I think the big tip-off for me, Leza, would have been the cell phone pings, as well as the foraging, or I guess location of her foraging for mushrooms potentially in the forest, the tipping or destruction of the dehydrator into the E-tip area is kind of crazy to me, and also the fact that her husband's been poisoned, or allegedly poisoned rather, 4 other times. I mean, that's just nuts. But the motive around it still bothers me. I've not really come to a conclusion. But thank you, Leza, for an awesome question. If you've got any questions of your own based on this case or any other cases, feel free to pop it into the episode comment section on Patreon or on YouTube or on any platform that you're listening to me that allows comments. But Patreon is predominantly where I read the comments from my wonderful friends online. Thank you so much for your support, everyone. And with true crime coming up next weekend, if you have any topics you want me to talk about in particular, any true crime cases you want me to dive into, email me at storiesfablesghostlytales@gmail.com, write directly to me via Patreon, or even leave a comment in the episode itself on what you would like to see next. Thank you again for your support, and have a fantastic week. See you next weekend. Bye.
A wet night glow in West Hollywood light, neon humming through the end of a shift, a room full of music, a VIP tide, and a smile that's practiced, steady, swift. Some names walk in like they own the air, some workers learn what VIP can mean, and the night keeps moving unaware until it doesn't, not this scene. Because sometimes danger is in an alleyway, sometimes it's a driveway and a gate, and sometimes just one dream is a sentence the world learns too late. Castle walls, the morning came cold, one sharp sound and the dark took hold. A life reduced to courtroom years, and a quiet chair and a foyer of fear. We tell it gently, we tell it true, not for the fame but for what we lose. The castle near a gunshot, and the question that remains, what do we do? A performer's path isn't straight or kind, roles fade out but the rent stays loud. So you take the work, you hold the line, and you keep your head up in the crowd. And in the papers, years will pass, arguments stacked like stone on stone, but in the center, under all that noise, is one name that you stand alone. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive fast, sometimes it comes in a second round, but the truth still has a gravity, it drops like a weight when it's finally found. Behind the castle walls, the morning came cold, one sharp sound and the dark took hold. But we speak her name, we keep it clear, we don't let it drown in a souvenir. We tell it gently, we tell it true, not for the fame but for what we lose. The castle and the gunshot. Now tell me, how do you weigh the truth? Thank you for listening, you amazing listeners.
is my gym genius, Maya my queen of cats, and Sangeetha the seer that sees all. And to all my Earl Grey enforcers in tears, thereafter all my love to you all. See you soon.